I understood what was happening as I watched my sister's in-laws' house from far away. When I realized the truth, I was shocked. I wondered about the intentions of my sister's husband and his family towards her all this time. How many times had they tricked my sister with a straight face? It was unforgivable. No matter what, I was determined to make them pay. My name is Sally, and I'm 45 years old. When I tried to wear my funeral clothes again after a long time, I couldn't zip up the dress around my stomach. At first, I thought my body hadn't changed much, but it was obvious I'd gained some belly fat. The last time I wore this dress was when I was 30. My sister Jane, who had a weak heart since she was young, sadly passed away at 27 due to worsening pneumonia that led to heart failure. It's strange that I was the only one who spoke with Jane before she passed away. I happened to visit her in the hospital that day. Jane probably had many plans since she was only in her second year of marriage. She likely never thought she'd leave this world so soon. When I remember her smile as she talked about wanting to stroll under the autumn leaves after leaving the hospital, it breaks my heart. On the day of Jane's funeral, when I couldn't come to terms with her tragic death, something happened. Just before the ceremony started, I went to the restroom. There I saw Jane's husband Bob talking on the phone in the nearby lounge. Yeah, once the funeral is done and Christmas rolls around, things should settle down a bit. Yeah, you're right. No, we should keep a low profile until the memorial mass about a year later. I don't usually listen in on people's phone calls, but this time I couldn't help but be curious about what they were saying. What does he mean by keep a low profile until the memorial mass about a year later? The deceased, he must mean Jane, right? The way Bob is talking, it doesn't sound like he's talking to a colleague. All of Jane's family is here at the ceremony. Who could he be talking to? Sorry for keeping you waiting. Yeah, I get it. No, the kid's fine. They don't suspect a thing. Neither my wife nor anyone in her family has noticed I have a child. Just stay home and relax. What? I was shocked. Did he just say he has a child? For the record, Jane and Bob didn't have any children. They decided not to because it was uncertain if Jane's body could handle childbirth. They were both in their first marriages, and we never heard anything about Bob having a child. What's happening? Honestly, Bob's strange conversation left me confused and overwhelmed with thoughts. But suddenly, I remembered the words Jane desperately tried to tell me just before she went into surgery. There's a child at home. After Jane lost consciousness and passed away a few days later without waking up, I never got to hear the rest of what she wanted to say. I was the only one who heard those words. The shock of losing Jane was so huge that I didn't have time to think about what she meant. But when I connected Jane's words about home with what Bob said about stay at home in their old house, which Sally wouldn't call their parents' house, just home. But there were no children in our family home either. After a bit of thinking, it hit me all of a sudden. Could it be that the child Bob was talking about on the phone is living at Bob's parents' house? When that idea came to mind, I couldn't sit still. If that were true, I don't think I could forgive Bob. After paying my respects at Jane's memorial service, I was eager to test my theory. I left the funeral home right away and went straight to Bob's parents' house. It's within walking distance from Jane and Bob's place. Bob is an only child, and his parents are getting older, so they decided to live close by. Jane had worries about living so close to her in-laws, wondering if she could get along with them better. But in reality, they hardly ever went back there and had very little family interaction. Maybe that's why even at Jane's funeral, Bob's parents didn't seem too upset about what happened. Instead, they seemed more interested in playing with their phones, which I found kind of strange. Well, I guess this is what happens when the relationship with in-laws is so distant. At least they could pretend to be more sympathetic at a time like this. Remembering how Bob's parents behaved, I finally reached Bob's parents' house. I hesitated to ring the doorbell. Everyone should be at Jane's funeral, so there shouldn't be anyone home. But what if someone did answer the door? What would I say? I still didn't have any proof of Bob's wrongdoing, and I wasn't confident about confronting someone without evidence. As I thought about this, I went around to the back of the house and peeked inside through a window that wasn't closed. I could see the whole room. Could someone really be in there? Just as my heart skipped a beat. Hey, stop moving. Look, stay still. Yeah. A child ran out into the yard, followed by a woman I didn't recognize. I instinctively hid and watched them from the shadows. The child looked a lot like Bob, with wobbly steps indicating he'd just started walking a few months ago. The woman seemed to be around Bob's age, and her eyes resembled the child's, making me certain she was the mother. Oh God, did Bob really cheat on my sister? When did this betrayal start? When did Jane find out? Even though my suspicions seemed to fit together perfectly, I had so many questions and didn't feel any better. Instead, tears started to well up. I'll never forgive him. I promised myself to make him pay for what he did to my sister. Later, I went back to the funeral home and attended Jane's burial in the churchyard. Even though everyone thought I left halfway through, when I explained that I couldn't handle the shock of losing Jane, they seemed to understand. I highly doubt anyone would suspect I went to Bob's house, but I was relieved that my sister's in-laws didn't seem to notice anything strange at all. The next day, I made up my mind to ask for a private investigation on Bob from the only detective agency in town. To my surprise, it was run by Jane's friend Layla, whom I remembered from the funeral. Layla told me that Jane had also asked for an investigation on her husband. After she requested the investigation, Jane got sick and passed away. Even though I have to keep things confidential, I think Jane would have wanted you to know, Layla said. With that, Layla shared the details and findings of the investigation Jane had requested. Once, even though they were engaged, Jane and Bob almost broke up. Bob got cold feet just 6 months before their wedding, saying he wasn't sure he could protect Jane, who had a weak heart, and he wanted some space. After a lot of thinking, Jane agreed and decided to distance herself from Bob. However, about 2 months later, Bob apologized and said he wanted to marry Jane after all, so they patched things up and went ahead with the wedding. After that, Bob worked really hard, even on his days off, because he wanted to buy Jane a house in the future. Jane talked about their relationship like everything was fine, like she was proud of it, so I thought they were okay. But I was wrong, Leila explained. In reality, right after getting engaged to Jane, Bob started having an affair with his childhood friend Nancy. They had dated before but broke up over a small disagreement. Even though Bob met Jane and got engaged, he still had feelings for Nancy. When Nancy reached out to him, those old feelings came back. To make matters worse, Bob's excuse about getting cold feet was a lie. Around the same time, Nancy got pregnant, and Bob was torn about whether to leave Jane and marry her. He even talked about it with some friends, but Nancy was firm in her decision. "If you stay with me, I won't ask you to marry me. But I'm going to have this baby," Nancy told Bob. Bob didn't want to break up with Nancy, but he also didn't want to tell his wife Jane about the baby. At the same time, he couldn't ignore a child he might have with someone he cared about. He didn't want Nancy to have the baby, but she was determined to keep it. Eventually, Bob opened up to his parents about the situation, only for them to say, "This will be our first grandchild, so let her have the baby." Bob's parents had always preferred Nancy as his partner since they knew her well from childhood. Plus, they didn't seem to like Jane much because she was frail and might not give them a grandchild, which they often complained about to others. Fortunately, Jane is frail, and she won't last long. Once she's gone, acknowledge the child and marry Nancy, Bob's parents proposed, and Nancy agreed. Though it was a twisted plan, it appealed to Bob. If his parents say so, then it must be okay, he thought. So it was decided that Nancy would have the child. Nancy, like Bob, was an only child, and her parents had already passed away. That's why Bob's parents spent a lot of time at Nancy's house, helping her during her pregnancy. The story about Bob working hard for Jane right after their wedding was a lie. He was probably visiting his newborn baby during that time. There were witnesses who saw Bob going to Nancy's house often, Layla explained. This suggests that the excuse of moving closer to their elderly parents was also a lie. They actually wanted to be near the child. As the child grew up, they respected Bob's parents' wish to spend more time with their grandchild, so Nancy and the child stayed more often at their house. With various excuses, they kept Jane away from her in-laws, and eventually, they stopped going home altogether. "It's enraging how they're endorsing infidelity as a family," Layla concluded. "Just a month ago, my sister found out about Bob's cheating. She was feeling sick and left work early, probably not realizing that Jane was home. Bob, who hardly ever texted or called when Jane was around, came home earlier than usual that day and apparently made a call somewhere. 'I got off work early. Can I come over now?' 'My wife? She's at work. I don't think she'll find out. She seems to be getting sick a lot lately and might go to sleep early. If I say I'm working late, I think I can stay longer with you,' Bob said. 'Yeah, I also want to live with Nancy and the kids soon. Every time she says she's not feeling well. I think she won't last much longer, replied the other person. Yay, I'm looking forward to it every time. Just imagining how Jane felt hearing that from her sickbed makes my heart ache. This incident made Jane aware of Bob's cheating, and she seemed to have hired a private investigator who happened to be her friend Layla. The investigation revealed everything, and just as Jane was about to confront Bob with a divorce, she collapsed and passed away. As Layla finished telling me all this, she lowered her gaze and said, "Jane must have been heartbroken." I couldn't agree more. I wanted to avenge Jane's pain. I couldn't bear the thought of Bob and his parents enjoying having a grandchild while Bob planned to remarry. But I've only just learned all this, and I don't know what to do. After thinking for a while, I had an idea. Layla, are you good with computers? At my words, Layla smiled and said, I got this. The next day, I went to my sister's in-law's house. When I rang the doorbell, my sister's mother-in-law appeared on the monitor, looking surprised to see me. "Oh, Sally, what's going on?" she asked, sounding a bit anxious. "I need to talk to the family about Jane's things. Can we talk for a moment?" Hearing my request, my sister's mother-in-law fell silent, and the intercom went quiet. Oh no, maybe she won't let me in. Feeling nervous, I waited for a while. And then Bob appeared, saying, "I'm sorry, Sally. The room was messy, so I had to tidy up a bit. Please come in." "Oh, Bob, you're here. Perfect timing," I said with a smile. Bob's expression stiffened. He probably thinks I haven't figured out his cheating yet. His face stiffened, likely because he's hiding something. In fact, I had just seen his mistress and their child through the window. I bet he was cleaning up after them. I wonder which room they're in. Bob and my sister's in-laws seemed uneasy as they watched me enter the room. As soon as I took a sip of the tea they served me, Bob asked, "What's this about Jane's belongings?" Yeah. It's about this," I said, laying out a photograph on the table. Bob and his parents froze as they looked at the photo. "Bob, who is this woman?" I asked. "I don't know her," Bob replied hastily. In the photo, Bob and a woman were in bed together. The other day, this was sent to our house. It said that Bob is having an affair, I explained. Hearing this, his parents glared at Bob, and Bob shook his head frantically. "Wait, I don't remember this photo," he shouted. Ignoring his protests, I laid out more photographs. Each one showed Bob and the same woman kissing or on a date at a nearby amusement park. People who cheat don't usually admit to their memory lapses, do they? I said, feeling the tension rise. "I'm used to it," my sister's mother-in-law sharply retorted. "What are you implying, young lady?" "No. Mom, you've got it all wrong." "I don't know anything about this," Bob protested. "Then what's this picture about?" Even though you have a child with Nancy, I immediately responded to my sister's mother-in-law's words. My sister's father-in-law looked guilty and said, "Oh, you mean this child? And is this woman Nancy?" I asked, showing a photograph of Bob holding a child. What? The entire in-law family was speechless, and even though Bob kept denying the accusation, my sister's mother-in-law slapped him, calling him a worthless son. "Do you have other children too?" she demanded. "Please listen to me, Mom, Dad," Bob pleaded. But my sister's in-laws ignored Bob's pleas, scolding him for betraying their beloved grandchild. "What nonsense bringing this here?" The picture was sent to her house. "I don't know much about it either," Bob exclaimed. "I came here seeking clarity, but it seems Bob does have a child," I said, preparing for a confrontation. Bob was at a loss for words. But honestly, Bob was telling the truth. He doesn't have any other affair besides Nancy. I didn't plan to reveal this, as I didn't want to be accused of spreading false information later on. However, this picture is fake. It's a composite one that I had Layla create. I could have used a real picture of the child with the actual person Bob cheated with, but I chose a combined photo because of certain reasons. I planned to confront him by asking him about the child, but luckily, my sister's mother-in-law revealed the truth earlier than I expected. "So, your quietness means it's true, isn't it? Earlier your mom also mentioned something about a child and Nancy," I said while my sisters-in-law stayed still where they were. "The note that came with the picture said these kids are being looked after in this house." "That's not true." My sister's mother-in-law quickly disagreed with what I said. "Are you sure?" "Of course, it's not true." "Then show me all the rooms." Huh? Without waiting for their approval, I stood up from my seat and headed towards the room next door. Hey, wait a minute. You can't just snoop around other people's houses. Bob raised his voice. If there's nothing to hide, then you should show me. That's not the point. Then what's the issue? Well, without waiting for Bob's response, I ignored the attempts of my sister's in-laws to stop me and peeked into the next room. She's not here, I concluded, and then I went upstairs to the second floor. Despite facing obstacles and scraping my knee, it was nothing compared to my sister's pain. I was willing to endure any number of fresh wounds. Pushing past my sister's in-laws, I opened the door to the room on the second floor, pushing Bob aside as I did so. Ah, there she is. In the room, Nancy and a child were sitting on the bed. Well, who do we have here? It was a different woman and child from the ones in the picture. What's happening? Bob asked. At my words, Bob turned pale, and Nancy looked puzzled, saying, "A picture?" Yes, it seems like Bob here has been cheating while my sister was around. Look at this picture. As I showed the fake photo to Nancy, her face twisted in anger, and she crumpled the picture. What is this? You were with another woman. No, Nancy, it's not like that. Just listen. Nancy was furious, and Bob looked pale. Having gotten the proof I needed, I'd added, "So you were indeed involved with Bob, huh?" My sister's in-laws were stunned, unable to believe what was happening. Why? You told me I was the only one. You said we didn't have to get married, and I wanted to have a child and be with you. And now this. Nancy, there must be some mistake. Maybe it's a look-alike or Photoshop. What do you mean, maybe? You can't deny it completely. I can't trust you anymore. For a moment, I was surprised by the mention of Photoshop, but since Bob was too flustered to deny it properly, Nancy's suspicions were at their peak. A man who's so unsure of himself, you'd be better off not trusting him. He ruined my sister's life, I said, offering my serious advice. Nancy's face hardened. My sister went through a lot because of him, but she probably understands that already. I don't need to say anything, I thought to myself. Now, I need to act like I'm on Nancy's side and get her to listen to me to achieve my goal of not letting any of Bob's family or Nancy be happy. I understand, Nancy muttered. Wait, Nancy, I'm serious about you, I interrupted Bob's desperate attempt to win Nancy over. So you weren't serious about my sister, but you told her you were, even made marriage vows to her. Looks like you really are an untrustworthy man, Bob, I said. At my words, Nancy's face darkened. With the fake photo and everything, she seemed to start doubting whether Bob's words were sincere. Good. If you were serious, you wouldn't be cheating from the beginning. No matter what, you should stick to one person, I emphasized. As I stressed my point, Nancy's expression grew even darker. Bob's face turned ghostly pale. He must have sensed the growing distance in Nancy's feelings. We should break up, Bob. I don't want to be your backup option. After seeing that photo, I can't trust you anymore. I could handle being the other woman, but I can't stand the thought of being the third one, Nancy declared, tears flowing down her cheeks. Bob instinctively reached for her hand and pleaded, "Please, just listen to me." But Nancy pulled away, stating firmly, "I don't need you to acknowledge the child anymore. Just leave me alone." As Nancy left the house with her child, Bob's entire family was saddened by the loss of both the child and the planned second wife. Meanwhile, I felt a sense of victory inside. Later, I had Bob write a legal document officially ending his ties with our family, cutting off all connections. Additionally, he agreed to relinquish any rights he had to the inheritance left by my sister. My father, who is usually quite stern, heard everything from me and stormed into my sister's in-laws' home. They were shocked by his sudden appearance and seemed to agree to renounce any claim to the inheritance, wanting to sever ties with our family completely. Well, even though we call it my sister's inheritance, it wasn't much. But it's a relief that not a single cent of her assets went to him, I thought. On the day I brought the photos to Bob's house, it seems one of the windows was open. As a result, our argument and conversation could be heard clearly outside, along with revelations from Nancy's friend who lived nearby. Everything that happened in Bob's house was exposed to the entire neighborhood. As a result, rumors spread that Bob's house was cursed, and he decided to quit his job and leave town with his parents. Meanwhile, Nancy unexpectedly showed up at our family home after about 2 months. She came bearing $50,000 as a gesture of apology and gratitude for helping her see the truth. She wanted to make amends for how she had treated my sister. While I appreciated Nancy's intentions, money couldn't erase the pain my sister had endured. It didn't feel right for us to forgive someone for something they themselves couldn't forgive just because they offered money. We understood Nancy's gratitude, but we couldn't accept money from someone who had done such a shameful thing, so I declined to accept the money. Instead, we suggested that it be donated to a nearby children's home where my sister used to work. Huh, do you doubt whether such a woman would actually follow through with the donation? Of course not. I went with her to ensure the donation was made properly, so you can trust that it happened. If the money is used for that purpose, I believe my sister would be happy. I hope the children who have their whole lives ahead of them can find happiness, even on behalf of my sister. As for myself, it's hard to admit, but I struggled with the loss of my sister for a while, even experiencing mental health challenges. There was a time when it was so tough that I had to leave my job. But I've been gradually recovering, and now I work at Layla's detective agency. Leela and I became very close after that incident. I think it's because we were both comrades who had lost something important in such a tragic way. We found common ground. Although I didn't have a positive view of marriage because of what happened to my sister after being with my partner for 4 years, we got married last year. The experience of losing my sister during the COVID-19 pandemic made me realize that I never know when I might lose the chance to be with my loved ones. So I decided to get married. I want to cherish every moment with those I care about, without any regrets. Just watch me, Jane. I promise to live a long, fulfilling life for both of us. When I join you someday, we'll have a blast together, I declared, determined to live life to the fullest.